why does our childhood and things that we learned as kids, how does that impact our ability to self-regulate as adults?
The way I kind of describe it to most people is we have these neocortical structures. The neocortex is the new brain, which is what makes us uniquely human. And then we have these subcortical structures that are below that thinking brain, that are more like the feeling brain. And the subcortical structures communicate in feeling, and the cortical structures communicate in language. Now, it's really important to understand that as your brain develops, if you are subjected to a tremendous amount of stress, those subcortical structures will develop a pattern of protection rather than a pattern of growth. So let's just take riding a bike, for example. We usually learn how to ride a bike when we're kids, right? And once you learn it, it's in there. Same kind of thing with anxiety and stress. If you grew up in an environment where there was abuse, loss, abandonment, stress, rejection, your subcortical structures, the amygdala, hippocampus, brainstem, will start looking at the world with the eyes of protection. But if you get your needs met as a child and you're well loved and you're attuned and connected, your brain develops the way it should in this sort of growth pathway. So these subcortical, these deep structures that maybe didn't develop the right way or developed a sense of protection when you're very young, stay with you for your whole life. What we think on top of those structures is highly influenced by what those structures are doing. So we generally are less resilient than most people because those underlying subcortical structures didn't form in a way that made us feel that we were solid and we feel like we could accept growth and embrace growth. We looked more for protection. And if you look at DNA studies, if you look at epigenetics, if you have an air of protection, you are going to make proteins that foster that protection. You're going to start making a lot more cortisol, a lot more epinephrine, a lot of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is the reason why, people who have difficult childhoods often show up with inflammatory disorders way earlier than most, show up with rheumatoid arthritis in their 40s rather than their 80s, this kind of thing. So we have to be aware that this effort, these ways we grow up, and the efforts that we make to make ourselves feel better cognitively, if we don't go under and deal with the feeling aspect of it as well, we're really just painting over something that's, got a bunch of cracks in it. And that's, I think, how we heal, is that we go to the subcortical structures, we start using feeling to go back, use neuroplasticity in our favor, and start changing those subcortical programs from ones of protection to ones that will accept growth. And then our thoughts get better. And I know that was me. When I started healing from anxiety, I just noticed that my thoughts were better. And all the cognitive work that I did do, all the talk therapy, psychoanalysis that I did do, then it really started to make sense. Once I regulated my body, once I regulated those subcortical structures that were mediating all of this, and I was in a much more grounded place, then it's like, oh, of course that's why I do this. Of course that's why I do that. Then it started to make sense and it all started to glue together. But I think what we do in the society is we start thinking, okay, if I change your thinking, if I change the way you think about something, I'm going to fix your anxiety. But the problem's deeper. It's subcortical. And it's beyond, like, none of those subcortical structures, amygdala, hippocampus, pons, medulla, none of them understand language. They only understand feeling. They speak in the language of feeling. So we have to change the feeling with a feeling. We can't just, talk ourselves into healing anxiety. It doesn't work that way.
So what does that process look like? Because I think some people, because of the extent of their anxiety, and also coupled with the fact that we're used to getting things fairly quickly in life because we live in this instant gratification world, we want some of this stuff to happen and heal overnight, when in reality, it just doesn't work like that. I mean, some people have been living with this for decades and decades, or people had a childhood where it was traumatic for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. What's the healing journey look like? And typically, like, how much time? I mean, I know it's going to be different for everybody, but how much time should somebody expect for something like this to take?
Well, it depends on the level of trauma, and it also depends on the level of sensitivity. So I don't believe that we are born anxious. I don't think there's an anxiety gene. But what I do believe is that we are, and what may be genetically mediated is our temperament. Like if you look at my brother and I, my brother's kind of like, whatever happens, I'll just go with it. It's not a big deal, whatever. Whereas I'm like, okay, what's going on? Like we have to fix this. Something's got to. So I'm, of the two of us, the more sensitive to the environment than my brother is. And because I was born sensitive into a family with a fair amount of trauma, it kind of molded the way I am. My brother's not anxious. So it's funny, we grew up in the same kind of dysfunctional household with a schizophrenic father who was never abusive or violent, by the way. He was just crazy, which is it's very disturbing when you're a child to see your dad go psychotic and lose control of reality. So my brother isn't. Like he isn't anxious, but I would classify myself that I am. So it would be like when people say, well, I want to fix this, really quickly. It's like, okay, they had this great video out, and I think it's got it used to have 25 million views. I think it's got way more than that now, but it was called The Backwards Bike. I don't know if you've ever seen this video on YouTube, but basically this engineer made a bike so that when you turn the handlebars to the left, the wheel goes to the right, right? So people could not, he would take people out of the audience and say, nobody could ride this bike. So what he did was he tried to teach himself to ride this bike, and it took him 8 months to ride the bike. Now, he also, I believe, I want to get this right, I think he also had a son who was around 10 or 11, and his son learned how to ride the bike in about 3 months. But it took him 8 months to be able to learn that when I turn the handle this way, that I've got to lean this way. Because normally when you turn your handle this way, you lean into the turn, and everybody falls off the bike. So that's the analogy that I draw. These old programs, these old subcortical implicit, they call implicit programs, in our neurology are in there quite deeply. So no matter what someone tells you about rapid response therapy or whatever, the laws of physics and neurophysics still apply. Like you're not going to change a system's firing pattern overnight. It just doesn't work that way. I've seen people change considerably after psychedelics, but still, they're still working on those underlying firing patterns too. So psychedelics are kind of like, the atomic bomb for psychotherapy. It's kind of like a last resort, and it does help some people, but it can actually make other people's worse. So it's like you're not going to forget how to ride a bike overnight, so you're not going to heal your anxiety overnight.
And it's going to be a slow burn. It's going to be a long journey, just like anything else in life that you pursue. So let's talk about like how somebody can begin to do this. Let's like talk about some steps somebody can take, because somebody might be listening to this and
I hope someone's listening to this.
well, yeah, me too, right? They might be 30, 40, 50 years old, and then maybe throughout their course of their childhood, they did a bunch of drugs, or it's just been so much time, or they don't really remember. And they're like, I don't remember what happened in my childhood. Like, how am I supposed to figure this all out? Like, how can somebody start this self-discovery process to begin to unpack where all this comes from so that they can bring things full circle and begin to heal it?
I think it's really making an intention towards awareness of your youth, because 90+% of this starts when you're a child. So look around, and like I said earlier, look around at your relationships. Are you happy? Are you connected to your relationships? Do you feel, is love safe? Is it safe? That's a question that I ask just about everybody. Is it safe to love? Because, for me, I love my dad greatly. And, he would, up until probably 13 or 14, he was great. And then he started to sort of get more and more mentally ill until he finally committed suicide when I was 26. But I think it's one of those things about looking at your relationships and how close are you connected, and how do you trust love? Are you trusting of love? Because if you don't trust love, I can guarantee you that happened in your childhood. People don't just all of a sudden have this brilliant childhood and then at 25 say, oh, I can't be connected to people. I can't love. I'm having a hard time connecting with my partner or whatever. So I guess it's really looking at your connections, and are they good? Do you have loving connections? And I mean most of the time. We all have loving connections some of the time, but most of the time, do you feel connected to your kids, to your thing? Or, do you rely on an animal for your love? Because some people do. Some people don't trust people, so they go to a dog or a cat, and that's who they trust for their love. And that's problematic in and of itself too. So it's learning how to reconnect to yourself And there are different ways of doing that, but I find that adopting some sort of somatic healing is probably a good place to start rather than starting with the traditional kind of CBT, talk therapy, that kind of stuff. That's kind of the icing on the cake. That's later on. Really, it's developing a real internal connection to yourself and being able to trust and receive love. Because a lot of us with anxiety don't receive. We don't receive very well. And the reason why we don't heal is because we don't allow ourselves to receive, specifically love.
And so how does somebody take that knowledge that they've now learned? Let's just say that, like, for example, you got somebody listening to this and they're like, oh, like I can see my relationships have been negatively impacted. I can see that I'm kind of feeling like blocked off to love. And if you're saying that, we need to go back and look at like our childhood and some of the trauma that's there, like how does somebody begin to see where this all came from?
Well, sometimes like you don't have to actually go back into your childhood and look at it. You can just take something that really troubles you now and then search for it in your body. And I do this with people all the time. It's like someone will say, I'm deathly afraid of public speaking. And I'll talk to them and I say, okay, well, close your eyes, relax your jaw. I'm speeding this up quite a bit. Feel the energy of the ground that you can put your feet on. Feel the chair pushing up on you. Feel secure, feel safe. Relax your shoulders again, let your jaw go. And then let's just bring you into a room where in your mind's eye you're just about to address 400 people. Now keep relaxed, keep your jaw relaxed, keep your shoulders relaxed, keep your breathing. So you're at the podium, there's a bunch of people awaiting you to speak. What lights up in your body? Where do you feel that? And people will say, I have this squeezing sensation in my throat. And I'll say, well, how big is it? It's like, oh, it's about the size of my fist. Does it have a temperature? Yeah, it feels really hot. And they'll say there's a hot, squeezing, fist shaped thing in your throat. It's like, yeah, yeah. Anything else associated with it? Yeah, it kind of goes down into my heart. It feels like it's sort of squeezing my heart as well. Okay, good. Does it radiate to any other points of your body? Yeah, sometimes it goes into my back or whatever. So the more I can drill down on the somatic sensation of this, the more I'm getting into premotor areas, somatosensory areas that may have held those traumas, because I'll ask them and said, did you have a problem when you were younger talking in front of people? It's like, yeah, when I was in grade 7, I had to do a talk in front of the group and I said something stupid and everyone laughed at me and they talked about it for the rest of my time in junior school. So it's like finding that place, and then I say, okay, well, let's put our hand over that place in your throat, and let's just connect with it. Let's just allow it to be there. Let's just sort of see it. Sometimes people will get like sensations, memories, images of that child. Can you see that little, 13-year-old can you see what she was wearing? It's like, yeah, I was wearing this purple sort of jumpsuit. Can you see her eyes? Can you look in her eyes? And at some points, people will start tearing up at that point because this is a part of them that they've abandoned because it hurt. So that's what we do when we're younger. When we get hurt, we kind of push those things aside. We push that entity, that child in us aside, and we bury them. And I think it gets buried first in our unconscious mind, because Freud called this repression. Gets first buried into our unconscious mind, and as the body is a representation of the unconscious mind, it gets offloaded into the body because we don't want to consciously have to worry and feel this anymore. But the triggers of it are always around. So when this woman got asked to do a speech in front of a bunch of people, she may not have been aware of, her grade 7 experience, but it was certainly affecting her. And when I took her into a bit of a trance, that's exactly what the root cause of it was. So the short version of that is I got her to fully accept that little 13-year-old girl in the purple jumpsuit with the glasses and see her, love her, and protect her. And then that slowly eroded her fear of public speaking. Now, again, I'm shortening this quite a bit, but that's basically what happened.
So within a situation like that, would you recommend somebody like doing that exercise that like it seems like you like an introspective combined with like focusing on the breath, present moment, like on a daily basis once they've discovered that they have something that's stuck there, or only when they're facing that thing that scares them?
The former. The more you can practice it, the better off you're going to be. So if I said, hey, Doug, in 3 months here, and like April 1st, I am going to take you to the basketball court. And if you can make 3 out of 10 foul shots, I'm going to give you $5 million. Are you going to start practicing the day before?
No, I'm gonna practice like I'm gonna actually
No,
end the interview. I'm gonna
every
end the
day.
interview right now and I'm gonna
Yeah.
leave.
Exactly. So that's what I mean about, you have to make this connection with this younger version of yourself. And some days it'll come easy. Some days it'll be like, oh yeah, I really felt like I connected with that younger part. And I realize how woo-woo this sounds coming from a medical doctor and neuroscientist, but this is the only thing that healed me. I went through all sorts of scientific kind of things, and this was really what made a difference. So it's really finding that younger version of yourself that was hurt and going back and seeing them, hearing them, loving them, and protecting them, and showing them that they're not stuck back there anymore. Like I am not, a 12-year-old watching my father be hauled into an ambulance because he's completely lost his mind, right? Now, there's part of me in me that still is that, right? But I can, now that I've done work on that and I brought that part of me into belonging, into like, it's okay, you're safe with me. I've taken them. This is one thing about the amygdala. The amygdala has no sense of time. So it basically, my amygdala froze that moment. Like people, like, where were you on 9/11? Same idea. Amygdala does that. So it froze that moment in my mind of them putting my dad into the ambulance to haul him off to the mental hospital. That got frozen in my mind by the amygdala. And then when I see something like an ambulance or whatever, or somebody even to this day being put into an ambulance, part of me gets a little jolt of fear because I go back to that same place, because there is a theory that says that if you go through trauma as a child, that part of you gets stuck in that trauma. Now, if you had a trauma like that, now let's just say that I'm watching my dad out the window being hauled into this, strapped up and hauled in, and my mom comes and sit beside me and puts her arm around me and says, "Hey, you know what? This sounds really bad, but we've been through this before. He's going to be okay. He may have to spend a week or two in the hospital, but he'll be fine," right? Now, if you have an attuned parent like that, the energy from that trauma gets dissipated right then and there. But if there's no one around and you're the only person there, the only response you have is to dissociate, stuff that down into your unconscious, and then it just finds a place in long-term storage in your body until 40 years later you decide to bring it out and try to heal it.
Yeah, it's absolutely. We talked about how anxiety and fear can also, I think, they're pretty much identical twins, right? In many ways.
Actually, they're not. Here's the difference. I mean, they are. It depends on who you talk to, Doug. Like for me, like I've been studying this stuff for many years. So the difference between anxiety and fear is my little saying is the difference between anxiety and fear is 5 seconds. So if you can wait 5 seconds, that's anxiety. If you can't wait 5 seconds, that's fear. So I'll give you an example. So you are walking down the street and there are people approaching you with guns and knives. That's fear, because you don't have 5 seconds. But if you're up in your bedroom on the 34th floor of your condo, worried that if you go out, someone's going to attack you with guns and knives, you can wait 5 seconds, and that's anxiety. So there is a difference, and physiologically there is a difference too. So it's really important to understand that there is a difference between fear and anxiety. And I think the more we can distill anxiety down to its essence, which is what I try and do in the book, the better therapies we're going to have for it, because it's not all wrapped up in fear and shame and all this other stuff. We just get it on its own. We find out what it is, which is really basically this state of alarm that's locked in our body that's probably been there since we were children. And then the mind, being a meaning-making machine, just makes a worry. And then the worry makes the alarm worse in the body. And then the alarm makes the worry worse. And then we get caught in this alarm anxiety cycle. And some of us never get out of it. So one of the other tips that I give people is, when you're really alarmed, do you have to think? Like, can you just feel the alarm? Can you just sit with the alarm and allow yourself to feel it? Because it's when you add thoughts to it, that's when it becomes a runaway train. That's when it becomes impossible to manage, because it's kind of like having a fire and you're trying to let the fire just smolder itself out, but you keep throwing matches on it, and the matches are your thoughts. So if you can learn, and that's one of the biggest tips that I give people, like if you can learn to feel the alarm in your body, which is what some people call anxiety, but feel the alarm in your body without compulsively adding thoughts to it, eventually you'll be able to metabolize this fear, and eventually you'll be able to move through it. But if every single time you feel this fear, you go into your head, you never actually metabolize this. You never change it, because every time it comes up, you just go into your head and make up a worry, which takes you in a completely other different direction.
I've heard anxiety, or the alarm you call it, best defined. I learned this actually from a psychiatrist of mine back in the day. It's like trying to jump out of a burning building that's not on fire, right?
Yeah, okay, that's a good one. I like that. I
Yeah.
haven't heard that.
And
Yeah.
one of the things that helped me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is like riding the wave. Because what I would do is I would get these physical sensations. I used to have severe panic attacks. I'm talking, I went to the emergency room. I went to, at one point in my 20s, when I was as fit as could be, I went to a cardiologist because I thought there was something wrong with my heart. So that's how much panic I had.
Of course. You're
Yeah,
not
and what
alone.
would happen is similar to what you described, in that I would start to get these physical sensations, which were normal, I think, in some ways, about whether my nervous system was overworked based on my workload and my lack of sleep, or I was maybe excited about a presentation that I was giving, and these feelings were all normal. And what I would do is I would panic, and I'd be like, oh my God, my heart's racing. So what would happen? I would get even more anxiety. My heart would race even more. Then I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. And then that would be true with, if I got tingliness in my hands, oh my gosh, my hands are tingling. Then then my hand would then go numb. Like, it just creates this downward spiral quick. And the thing that helped me the most was getting good at not giving in to those feelings and just accepting it, that it was part of what was going on, and just riding the wave. And what I noticed was it was kind of like exposure therapy for me, that the more I did it, the less that stuff bothered me. And eventually I just, stopped getting physically responsive to the anxiety. So like, what are your thoughts on what I just said? 'Cause I think this is common for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it is too. Yeah, I think it's what you're describing is operant conditioning, and then extinction, which is basically once the stimulus doesn't create the same level of stress in your system anymore. So yeah, when we get like we were saying earlier, when we get into survival panic mode, the part of our rational thinking mind gets shut off, because from an evolutionary point of view, we didn't need our rational mind when we were running from, a predator or a warring tribe. And to this day, we're still like that. When we get really revved up and afraid, we lose our ability to be rational. So that's why it's very difficult to talk your way out of a feeling problem as far as that kind of thing goes. So yeah, it's staying in the feeling. And this is where this is where my wife would kind of come in and say, yes, stay in the state of alarm, but don't stay in there too long. What she does with people is like, okay, take the girl that I had, who the public speaker girl, when she got this alarm in her throat, right? She'd say, okay, stay with that alarm. Let's just allow it to be there. Let's just not try and add thoughts to it. Let's just allow it to be there. This alarm that's kind of going in and going down into your chest, that's hot and that kind of thing. Now, where is a place in your body that feels safe or at least neutral? And again, I'll shorten this again. And people say, oh, my right hand feels quite neutral. It's like, okay, let's really focus and draw our attention as deeply as you can into that right hand. Like, just really feel the fingers, see if you can feel the skin on the hand, really sense that feeling in your hand. It's like, okay, now if you're comfortable, can we go back into that alarm that's in your throat? And people go, yeah, okay. So you're in front of the class, this is coming up, this alarm is there. Can we just sit with that again? It's like, yeah, is that bearable? It's like, well, it hurts, but I can handle it. Okay. Now let's move back into your right hand again, that neutral part of your right hand again. Can you do that? Yeah, yeah, I can feel my hand. I can stay there. So what you're doing, I hear all these people saying you have to sit with it, like systematic desensitization. But the thing is, when people have had severe emotional, physical, sexual abuse, they can't resolve it on their own. No matter how long they sit with it, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So what we have to do is provide a counter vortex to that. We have to provide another place where they can go, and that operantly conditions again the brain to say, hey, this feeling of being in front of this class where I'm freaking out is not all of me. Because at the time, it does feel like all of you. And then when you get taken over by this, it does feel like all of you. So then when you start showing yourself, hey, actually, this isn't all of me, I can move over here too, then you kind of break its spell in a way. And that's about the basketball analogy. That's what I would do is I would get you to go into this, pick a trauma from your past, find a place in your body that doesn't have that, and then just go back and forth, oscillate between those two things, because you're teaching your unconscious mind it isn't this black, powerless, vacuous hole anymore that you had when you were 12 or 5 or whatever. That's we're kind of giving a lobotomy to that old program, because once you're in it, it has a tendency to suck you into it, and then on top of that, it creates thoughts that keep you sucked in it. So if we use your feeling, if we use your sensation and we move you into a different part of your body that feels, I mean, if you can use something that feels good, that's even better. But a lot of people, when they're that revved up, basically finding something neutral is the best we can do. And then just going back and forth between the two. And then practicing that on a daily basis so that you start teaching yourself, hey, when I get triggered into this alarm state, there is a way out. I've had a way out. I know that there's an escape route, because typically what happens is when we get triggered back into that thing, we become 13-year-olds and there is no way out. And it just cycles on itself. And then we add thoughts, which prevents us from getting out of it. So I hope that made sense.
For sure, for sure. And I definitely think, yeah, if somebody's been through a ton of trauma and abuse, it's going to be that you're going to obviously want to talk to a medical provider.
Yeah, you need, like, if you've had sexual abuse and physical abuse and all that kind of stuff, you almost always need a therapist to kind of help regulate that nervous system. It's very hard to deal and resolve, if not impossible, severe trauma on your own. I don't think we heal in isolation.
Got it. Yeah, for sure. 100%. And with all that said, you think like the best thing somebody can do when they're feeling, we've already kind of, I think, touched on this a couple times, but just to bring everything back full circle, the best thing somebody can do when they're feeling dysregulated is to sit with the feelings for a short period of time and then get connected to their body and their breath.
Even if it hurts. Like, that's the thing, because it will hurt. Like, that's the thing. Like, people say, oh, just connect with your body and it'll pass. It may not pass. It may still be freaking painful, right? But just stay with it and then move outside of it. And then what you can do even before that, if you want to use a cognitive thing, which a lot of people do want to use that, am I safe in the moment? So it would look like, okay, I'm freaking out about something. Am I safe in this moment? That's your first, maybe it's the easiest, it's the fastest kind of go-to. Am I safe in this moment? Connecting, with your sensation and really seeing, yes, you know what? I am actually safe in this moment. My mind's kind of taken away. But if that doesn't work, then move into where you feel the pain in your body. And then find a place in your body that doesn't feel pain. And then pendulate between those two things. Go back and forth. And that, after a while that pendulation part may not work right away, once you practice that, and here's the thing, people won't practice it. Like, when you're at home and you're feeling okay and you just had dinner, it's like, I don't want to go back into that old pain. So that's why people don't heal, is because you have to actually do some work. You actually have to bring back that old pain and metabolize it, so that when it comes up again, you're practiced. Like, you know what to do. You're not just sort of, every time it takes you, it just holds your head underwater and you can't escape. You need to practice this sort of cognitive as well as this somatic escape program, so that and you teach your unconscious mind, those subcortical structures I was talking about earlier on, that this pain isn't all of you. And once you see it, once you break the cycle, it's like the Wizard of Oz, you pull back the curtain. Once you see the trick, it's very hard for that to keep tricking you every time.
Is there a specific like cadence that you recommend for like the breath, and like do you recommend like box breathing?
Well, typically, I think the physiological sigh is the most effective and the quickest. What I do with most of my anxiety peeps is I have a variation on the physiological sigh. So instead of 2 sniffs in and 1 long breath out, I get people to do 3 sniffs in, because I really want them to expand their chest wall. Because when your chest wall expands, there is this sort of message that gets sent up to your brain that says, hey, we're okay. As your chest wall constricts, because that's what happens when we're stressed, there's a message that gets sent up that we're in danger. So it's like this. It's like hold at the top, and then I get people to close their teeth and then breathe out through their teeth, making a hissing sound, and try and elongate your exhales. I'll do this again, so I'll get people so they'll understand. And you repeat it again. Hold. And while you're hissing, you imagine a tire, an overinflated tire, like deflating in your mind's eye. Now, I used to use this for people whose blood pressure would go up. When I would go as a medical doctor, there are some people, when you start taking their blood pressure, it's called white coat syndrome, their blood pressure goes up through the roof because they know that you're taking their blood pressure. So I used to use this for people who had white coat syndrome, and it would drop their blood pressure like 50 or 60 points. That's what I use. I find physiological sighs helpful, and just making your exhalations longer than your inhalations. But that little procedure is what I find helps me the most, and it helps my anxious peeps the most, because it also involves opening up the chest wall as well. So 3 sniffs in, hold, then just try and elongate that, make that exhalation last as long as possible. I've done 2 cycles of it now, and I can feel my brain kind of fade a lot, because I'm used to doing this. Like, this is what one of my meditation things is. So this will kind of zone me out a little bit.
If you were to give the audience 3 tips to reduce their overall stress in their life, other than some of the things that we've already covered, what would you say?
Well, the thing about stress is that you can either decrease your stressors or increase your resources. Those are your 2 options, right? And I don't think people think enough about increasing their resources. So, self-touch, breath work, that kind of stuff. This increases your capacity and the resilience in your nervous system, so you can handle the amount of stress that you had yesterday, but you can handle it better because you have more resources. The other thing is, like, can you lower the stress? If you're constantly fighting with your spouse, can you get some counseling? Can you talk to them? Can you say, look, this is making me really unhappy. I'm sure it's making you unhappy too. What can we do to kind of lower our level of stress? So it's really, increase resources or lower stressors, and just make a list of what are the stressors in my life, and can I, sometimes, I have 2 kids and they're kind of flying around the house. There's not a whole lot you can do in a way. But you can teach them meditation too. You can teach them breathing. You can teach them. You can do self-touch with them, or put your hand on their chest and connect with them. Because when we soothe our kids, we have this natural soothing in ourselves. But if we're always running this peripatetic lifestyle where the kids are going to soccer and then they're going to band practice and they're going to this, like, it's just there's no presence in that. And it's not like I'm like, oh, you have to live in presence, and it's not like that. It's basically just create, more resources in your life, and try and be intentional about the stressors that you do allow in there, rather than just unconsciously, taking on more stuff. And a lot of us do that. I did that for a long, long time. Was if someone asked me if I could do something, I would just do it, and then now I realize, okay, if I do this, I'm actually increasing my stresses and probably decreasing my resources, because the time that I would use to do this thing for this other person is taking away from the time that I would do something for myself. So it's really being aware. I think that big thing for me, this is from like David Rosmarin's book, Thriving with Anxiety, about you have to either decrease your stresses or increase your resources. And I think it's such a simple but valuable tool to just realize, make your stresses intentional, make your resources intentional, because if you just sort of back your way through life, yeah, you're going to be stressed.
I want to go back to dopamine for a second, and as it relates to motivation and achieving things, and obviously making money, achieving goals, that sort of thing can be addictive and fleeting at times.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what you were talking about at the beginning, that we're in this like dopamine rat race, in many ways. But talk about how somebody can have a healthy relationship with that. So let's just say that they're doing everything that we're talking about now, and now they're on this pursuit of wanting to achieve the thing, and
Yeah.
they're on the process. How can they stay excited and motivated about what they're trying to achieve in a way that's sustainable?
Yeah, little goals. Like Andrew Huberman talks about that too, is like creating little goals along the way, rather than, have everything piled into when I finally get this thing. I often tell the story about when I got my medical degree, and as soon as they handed it to me, as soon as I felt the parchment paper of my MD degree in my hand, I was like, okay, what's next?
Mm.
What's next, right? There wasn't like, oh my God, this is such a miraculous achievement. This is amazing. It was like, okay, what's next? And I think that's a lot of our society is that we think that when we get somewhere, like everything, our problems are going to just resolve. I mean, for me, even like I created a program called Your Mind Body Prescription for Permanent Anxiety Healing. There's 3,000 people in there. In 8 months, 9 months, it's made me close to $400,000. And I've never had this much money in my life. And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, it was freaking amazing. And now it's kind of like, oh, it's just so human of us that we get into this thing where we think this is going to make things different. And I am not denigrating having like money to do stuff and that kind of thing too, because I know a lot of people don't. But it's just that old thing about like money's not going to make you happy, and wherever you go, there you are. It's great. I think we need purpose. We definitely need purpose, which is, I think, an amazing thing for human beings to have purpose. But don't put too much emphasis on the outcome and the final, like getting it, because it may not be the thing that you think is going to sort of heal your life or fix your life. And can you make little rewards along the way? Like I have this whiteboard in my office. I wish I could show it to you, but basically it's like it's pretty big. It's like 3 by 4. And every day I write stuff on it that I need to do. And that makes me feel better because, I'm not going to forget it, because like my little ADD brain forgets stuff all the time. So now I write it up there and I feel so much more comfortable. And then at the end of the day, what I used to do is as I finished the thing, I would erase them, right? And now what I do is I draw a line through them. So I see on the thing there's like 15 things with line. I mean, still got 5, 10 other things I've got to do, but there's 15 things with lines through it. It's like, freaking did that, like those things I accomplished. And I think those are like setting little goals for yourself. So I'm a big fan of these whiteboards, put them up in your office and just write even the smallest things, like go to the gym, call your daughter, whatever. Like when you do it, you put a line through it, and then you look at the end of the day and it's like, man, I got a lot of stuff done today. Whereas, 6 months ago, what I used to do is I would do a ton of stuff. And at the end of the day, I would go, I really don't know what I did today. Like, I really don't know what I got. I know I did some stuff, and then now I have a real like hardcore, like this is all the stuff that you got done. And it's like, you're doing pretty good.
I think one of the things people struggle with when it comes to the small goals is they don't know how to quantify it, right?
Yeah.
Because we've been taught that goals are just these big things you got to achieve. You got to lose the 50 pounds. You got to have $1 million in the bank. You have all these things. And so when they think about these mini goals, they're like, am I really playing big enough? Am I doing enough? How have you learned to quantify those for yourself so that it's not just manageable for you, but you're also like in a state of flow where you're still pushing yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think that whiteboard that I was talking about, I think that gives me that sense that, okay, even the small things, like I'm getting stuff done. And I think a
Right.
lot of us who are goal directed, we don't pay enough attention to the small stuff. We start looking for, big validation, money, or, awards or whatever it is. And those things are few and far between. But, creating this sense like, what did I do today? Who did I connect with today? That's another thing that I do. I try and just send a text to somebody that I scroll down in my text and see someone that I haven't texted for, 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, and say, hey, I really appreciate you giving me advice on that. 3 weeks ago, it's made a difference. And like just the connection, just creating those connections with other people, even if it's small, even if it's a little text message, like it really does change this dopamine driven thing into this sort of serotonin. I did something nice for someone today. Like I really, and that's doing something for you. Like there is that sort of Buddhist concept that giving is actually getting. And I think the more generous we are with giving, without exhausting ourselves, of course, the more we get.
You have an interesting background in that you're a neuroscientist, but you also have this side of you that understands trauma, spirituality, and stuff like that. And you mentioned like the money you were making. You're like, yeah, it was cool for a few weeks, but then it was like, on to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
And people do that all the time. I'm wondering I would love to get your thoughts on this, whether or not you think, is it a survival thing that it's like, I need to make more money because that's just what we're taught, or is it an ego thing?
Partly. I think it's partly. And I think it depends on how you were raised, for sure. Like
Okay.
when I grew up, my brother and I and my family, we didn't have very much money. My dad was schizophrenic and bipolar, so he couldn't work. And he also liked to chain smoke as well. So packets of cigarettes, cartons of cigarettes were expensive. So there was points where we would eat, or we would drink powdered milk because we couldn't afford regular milk. So I think there is an element of lack in my money thing as well. There's also a sense of validation, making more money and that kind of thing. I think to be honest, that's part of it, is just, being in, as a general practitioner, I made a reasonable income. I made, probably between $100,000 and $200,000 a year, to me. And that was great, but it never really seemed to satisfy me. I did a lot of travel. I did a lot of stuff with it. It wasn't like that I was feeling a lot of lack, but I think a lot of it for me is that sense that, you're not going to be hungry again. Not that we were ever really like hungry or whatever, but there wasn't a whole lot of extras growing up. So, and it's not like I feel like it's all going to get taken away from me and that kind of stuff too. But I think it depends on how you grew up. But what was your family's relationship with money? And how does that affect you today? So for me, I think the money partly is validation, is like I'm on the right track, I'm helping people. And the thing about my program is I priced it at $100. Like, it's not like I'm selling this thing for $9.97 or something like that. Like, I want it accessible to as many people. And my daughter works for me, and she was saying, there's people in Chile, there's people in Australia, there's people in India, there's people, in Uruguay that are buying this program. It's like, and it warmed my heart to know that this is getting, across the world. And that's why I priced it at $100, because it's less than the price of a therapy session, and people can actually really see what their anxiety truly is. And so for me, that validation is very, life affirming for me. So I'm living my purpose for sure. And I think that's I think one of the things that causes the most angst with people is they feel like, well, I'm not living my purpose. I'm not living what I should do. And even as a medical doctor, I didn't feel like I was living my purpose. So now I do. So I don't know if that it's kind of a roundabout approach. I don't know what your original question was, Doug.
We were talking, I was asking, like, if you think that people want more once they get the thing, like once they make
Right.
right. Is it a survival thing, or is it an ego thing?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's definitely both. Like, there's an element of survival, there's an element of ego, but there's also an altruistic element of, like, I just love what I'm doing. And I love that I'm creating a different conversation about anxiety. I love that I'm creating something different that psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever, can look at as a different model to use, rather than this traditional model that's just what you think. Anxiety is just what you think, and it's not. It's basically, it's how you feel, and how you feel dictates what you think, more than how you think dictates what you feel. And it's both. It's actually both. But what traditional therapy misses is that they miss this somatic role, this role of what we call interoception. The brain is always reading the body. And if the body has stress in it, the brain will create worries and stresses that are completely consistent with the stress in the body. And if you can learn how to release that stress in the body, the negative thoughts kind of fade away into the background, because you actually treat the true root underlying cause of this, as opposed to just trying to fix thoughts, which is basically just trying to, shovel water out of a river. It doesn't work.
At the beginning, we talked about why people are feeling lost right now, and I think I heard you say something to the effect of people are feeling separated from
Yeah.
others. They're feeling alone. They're feeling disconnected from themselves, separated from themselves. Talked about anxiety. We've talked about anxiety and the problems that can create if we're not kind of careful in how we navigate that. Do you think, I mean, we've covered, feeling lost, unmotivated. We've talked about why people don't achieve their goals, why people are unhappy. Do you think at the crux of this, the fundamental reason that people are feeling this way is their inability to deal with anxiety and regulate their nervous system?
Well, it's their inability to connect with themselves and connect with other people, and that's what's happening in a society, as a society, is that we're losing um, that goodwill that we have for other human beings, whether or not they look like us or not, whether or not they're white males or BIPOC or whatever it is. Like, we're losing that ability to just give credibility to other human beings for just being human beings. And I think that the more separate we become from other people, the more separate we naturally become from ourselves, which lends to dysphoria, anxiety, depression, all this kind of stuff. And we're seeing an increase in all of these things, including suicides, because people are just getting more and more separate from each other. And my mentor in developmental psychology, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, said this one thing that's always stuck with me is like, all anxiety is separation anxiety. And I add on there, and it's mostly separation from yourself. So the more connected we are, the happier we are. The more disconnected we are, the more us and them mentality we start to adopt. And this is what's happening in the States as far as politics. Is it's not so much about governing, it's just about making the other side look bad. Because we do get this little, vasopressin dopamine rush from, pecking down or hitting down on someone else. And unfortunately, it's like an addiction, but it's never satisfying. It's never satisfying to create an us and them mentality, because ultimately you're separating from yourself, which is going to make you more unhappy, which is what's happening with society in general, is we're just getting more separate from each other.
I think talking about this more big picture, as far as being connected to ourselves and doing what we want in life and having autonomy and feeling like we're running our own race, we're not paying attention to others as much. How do you think somebody can know if they're living like a fully aligned life?
I think you just know. Like, when you're aligned, you don't think about living alive. It's like when people used to come into me in my practice and say, I'm worried that I'm getting Alzheimer's disease. And it's like, well, the fact that you're worried about it, and they're worried about your memory, is probably a sign that you don't have it. Because the thing about Alzheimer's disease is that the memory starts to go and people don't notice it. So people around them notice, but they don't notice themselves. So it's kind of like when you direct attention to it yourself, when you know that you're not feeling, validated or mentally strong, what are you going to do about that? Typically what most of us do is kind of like the lazier way, which is get, locked into our addictions and take short-term gratification. It's hard to actually do the big things. It's hard to start an exercise program. It's hard to stop eating sugar. It's hard to do these things. But I think, when we make the intention that we're going to do it, and we take it in small steps, like I said about the meditation, just breathe in and out, count to 10. Each breath in, 1, out, 2, and just do that for 5 days. And then take it up to 20, and take it up to 50. It's like little steps in connection with yourself, because the first leap is too much. It's too much to say, I'm just going to stop sugar altogether. Some people can do it. Or I'm going to stop my addictions altogether. I'm going to stop drinking altogether. It's like, it's really hard to sort of take that huge step. And if you can take it in incremental steps, and all the while feel connected to yourself, self-touch, like breathing, like connected in your body, like really feel it, even if it's uncomfortable, like really allow yourself to stay with the emotion, stay with the feeling, then you start learning how to live. Otherwise, you're just basically kind of living in this dopamine-driven, peripatetic life.
How can somebody begin to identify what they want for themselves?
It's a tough question. It's a really tough question, because I think for so long we've looked for validation externally, and we lose the muscle of what do you need. And that's why I say, what did you do when you were a kid? Did you draw? Did you dance? Did you ride your bike?
I did drugs. I'm kidding.
Okay, well, there you
No,
go.
I'm joking.
There you go. Get back into drugs.
No,
Like, that's what you got to do, man.
I did though.
My
No,
medical
go on.
opinion.
Sorry, I was just sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. I like it. No, if you start getting like Robin Williams was like that too, when he would come into the club that I worked at when he was filming a movie, and you could talk to Robin and he would have a conversation with you, but as soon as someone came in and cracked a joke, he was gone. So, and I think that was his addiction. His addiction was humor, because humor does make you feel better. Humor and tears, crying and laughter are not that far apart, believe it or not, in the nervous system. So both release a lot of like stress and trauma and that kind of thing. So laugh more. I mean, if you can go to a comedy club, if you can find ways of activating that sort of parasympathetic nervous system through tears. Sometimes when stress builds up on me a lot, it's like I will watch videos of dog rescues, dogs that are abandoned or chained up or whatever and being rescued, and that brings me to tears and allows me to sort of move through that negativity. Because another thing Dr. Neufeld taught me is that tears are adaptive. That your wife is still leaving you, your pet has still died, but you change the internal structure of your brain, so your perception of those things isn't quite as bad. So tears don't change the external event, but they change your internal perception of the event. And I think that's why men commit suicide way more than women do, because we've taken tears away, which is a very helpful way of discharging negative emotion, but we've taken that away from men. So of course they commit suicide more. I mean, there's a number of reasons for that, but I think that's one of the ones to be considered, is that we take tears away from boys when they're very young, and tears are one of those things that help you adapt to a situation you cannot change.
You talked a few minutes ago about our idea of what we want in our life. A lot of it comes from the external, and we have to really go within and come up with what we truly want in our lives. And you talked about going back to what we did as a kid, like in a tactical way. Do you think it's helpful for people to outline like things that they want in their life, morals, values, beliefs, or do you find that there's something else that might be a little bit more effective?
Yeah, everybody's different, but I don't think it hurts to sort of write down, what are the things that you want? And then just because your writing brain is different than your speaking brain, right? So that's why I think journaling is so important to understand, is that, we have this internal conversation with ourselves all the time, but that conversation may not ever be different. But when you start writing something down, your writing brain is different than your speaking brain. So you will see things that you will write that kind of surprise you, because it's not the typical thing that you converse with yourself in. And you will see things when you write it down that you won't see when you speak it out loud. So I think that's why journaling is really important. But it's just creating this sort of sense of quiet, because you can't see what you want while the cacophony of life is around you. You really have to take those and make the intention, and realize that it may take you a month or two or longer to realize what you want, because that muscle, like I said, has been atrophied from disuse for so long. You've been so used to looking externally for validation, dopamine, whatever it is, that we lose that ability to kind of just go inside and think, okay, what is it that I like? What makes me feel good? And what does make you feel good? And if it's an addiction, well, be careful of that. But if it's a connection with yourself or others, give yourself more of that.
I feel like one of the traps people will fall into is they'll hear stuff like this and they're like, all right, I got to figure out a way to make my life perfect with my thoughts, my beliefs, like my anxiety, everything, before I take a step in the right direction and try to like accomplish something in my life. And I think that one of the fastest ways to figure out what you want in life is to move forward, and then by trial and tribulation, learn what you don't want in life.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's true. And I think it's especially true when you're younger. Like my youngest son, he's 19. No, he's 20 now, just turned 20. And he's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life? And I always tell him, it's like, look, I didn't start back to school until I was 22, right? Like, you still got some time to figure it out. Like, I didn't become a doctor, and I didn't start I was a bartender. I did all sorts of like different jobs before I went back to pre-med to become a physician. So it's really kind of getting into that quiet space with yourself. Like, what do you like to do? Like, Michael likes to tinker with stuff. Like, he likes to fix stuff. And it's like, so is there something in that realm, that you might like to do? And he's kind of looking into like electrician or something like that. Like, what do you like? Like, look around you and see what your hobbies are like. See what the things that you like. Now, you may not be able to make a living at those things. Like, that's the thing. But if you do those things, you're much more likely to be able to start exercising the muscle of what you do want, as opposed to just like blindly kind of, oh, well, this profession might be good, or this profession will make me a lot of money.
And I see a lot of people, like I know a lot of people who are quite wealthy and extremely unhappy. Now I'm selecting for people that want to, talk to me, because that's kind of what I deal with is chronic sort of existential anxiety on some level. But it's just being quiet and developing that connection with yourself, because unless you have that, you're kind of fumbling around in the dark. And one of the reasons I became a doctor was because I'd never really felt like I was listened to as a child. So, my dad took up a lot of the space in my house because of his mental illness. So one of the reasons I became a physician, and one of the reasons I do this, is probably because I'm heard. People are listening to me, and so we have these propensities in us for sure. Like, I've always been a performer, even when I was a kid. So it was kind of like, okay, this is why I became a stand-up comic. This is why I became a doctor. This is why I became sort of on Instagram, is because I want to be heard. But there's part of me that's very quiet too, that doesn't really, that looks at the part of me that sort of needs validation. It's like, well, and I think you just learn about yourself, when you're quiet. You don't learn about yourself when you're always running from place to place to place. I think you just become more of what's externally expected of you. And one of the things that I used to end some of my talks with is, be careful of what you're good at, because people will expect that from you, and then you will expect it from yourself, and it's very hard to get outside of that groove once you've lived in it for 10, 20, 30 years. But you can do it. I did it.
A topic that often gets talked about when it comes to anxiety, stress, feeling lost, unmotivated, etc., is dealing with the unknown.
Yeah.
How do we get better at
That's
that?
what anxiety is. Anxiety basically is uncertainty intolerance. That's what anxiety is. Like, in one sentence, I could tell you that anxiety is basically being intolerant of uncertainty, probably because uncertainty was so painful for you as a child, right? So whenever we experience uncertainty as adults, it takes us back through the insula, through that period, that feeling in our body of being helpless, being powerless. And we're not. We're adults now. But the thing is, our brain doesn't know that. When you go back, when you regress, one of my favorite sayings is, all emotional overreactions are age regressions. So when you see someone losing their, it's they're in an age regression, and they become 8 years old. And then we get into partnerships when each of us are 8 years old fighting with the other, and 2 8-year-olds hammering it out aren't going to do well. So it's really understanding, like, how do you understand how you go about things, and can you become aware of, are you an avoidant, as far as your attachment style? Not that I'm huge on attachment styles, but it's certainly a nice metric. Are you avoidant in your relationships? You get close, and then you're like, once you get too close, it's like, I can't do this anymore. Or are you anxious, where you're always chasing after someone else, right? And it's amazing how often the anxious and the avoidant match up with each other, right? They pair up. So it's just, but understanding yourself, like understanding, what you need, like what's your go-to when you get stressed, what happens? And, can you give yourself what you want from other people? Can you start doing that, as opposed to expecting it from other people? And I was thinking about this morning, is like, this whole thing about self-care. And I think a lot of people, specifically with anxiety, depression, OCD, personality disorders, all this sort of stuff, they don't look after themselves, because I think there is this subconscious drive in them that they think their parent is going to finally come back, and they're finally going to do what they're supposed to do. And I think that a lot of people don't look after themselves because of that. And consciously, they know it's ridiculous that the parent isn't coming back. But unconsciously, there's always that thing in us as children that we always, even as adults, the child in us is always kind of hoping that someone's going to come back and take care of us. And I'm here to tell you, nobody's coming to save you. It's up to you.
What are a few things that they can do to help calm their nervous system to bring them back to a normal state?
Well, one of the things that helps my daughter the most, and she told me this just the other day, like Leander's 37 now, 36. And she said, Dad, the biggest tip you've ever given me for my anxiety, her anxiety is not nearly as bad as mine was, but still, through the family. And she said, just telling myself, am I safe in this moment? In the middle of the day, the middle of the night, I know I'm worried about, this coming up, or a dentist in 2 weeks, or a flight, or whatever, but am I safe in this moment? And just sort of closing your eyes for a second, maybe feeling your feet on the floor, your butt in the chair, rub your thighs, like bring yourself into the sensation of the present moment. Because if we look at the way that the brain is structured, we have this big prefrontal cortex, we have this somatosensory strip behind it. And if we can bring ourselves into sensation, we automatically bring ourselves into the present moment, because worry is always about the future. So we mentally time travel into the future, and then we worry about the story that we've made while we're there. So bring yourself back into the present moment. Ask yourself, I know I'm stressed, but am I actually safe in this moment? Look around and see that you're actually safe in this moment. That's one thing. The other things that I'm actually more an advocate of is, breathing, feeling your body, really getting into the moment sensation of your body, because I don't think that we can solve the problems of an overactive mind with more thinking. It just doesn't work. But our brain will tell you that it will. Our brain tells us, hey, we just have to worry more and all this will work out. And it's just like a bottomless pit.
So do you believe at all in like cognitive behavioral therapy or affirmations or trying to change these like thought pattern loops to be able to help people when they get in these moments where they're, filled with worrisome thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question, Doug. So I think that, like before we were talking here, I think we've got into a real reductionist model of anxiety and believe that the mind can soothe the mind. I do believe in CBT, I do believe in cognitive therapies, because we are cognitive beings after all. I just think that when we're in this state of alarm, and I prefer the term alarm rather than anxiety. I prefer if someone says, hey, I'm really feeling alarmed today, rather than saying, I'm really feeling anxious today, because that words have consciousness to them. And I think the word alarm has a lot more meaning and consciousness than that. So it's really about, like I said, bringing yourself into the present moment. CBT does that to some extent, and there's nothing wrong with understanding the neocortical, the thinking side of anxiety. The problem with that on the deeper level is that most anxiety, chronic anxiety, not day to day, I'm worried about my rent, whatever, but chronic anxiety is mediated by those subcortical structures, those, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the pons, the medulla, like deep in the brainstem. So talking to those structures is not that helpful, because none of those structures understand English, understand language. So what we have to do is we have to use feeling instead of thinking. So cognitive stuff is helpful. It really is. It helps you understand what's going on. But in the short term, I prefer people going into the feeling state, metabolizing that feeling state, maybe using your breath, self-touch, whatever it is, metabolize the feeling state, which will bring back online your prefrontal cortex. Because what happens is when you're freaked out is, and this is kind of an error in our wiring, when we're freaked out, we lose our prefrontal cortex. We lose the rational part of our brain. So why are we trying to use the rational part of our brain when it's offline? So bring yourself back into the present moment, bring yourself into the feeling state of your body, breathe, get yourself grounded, get your prefrontal cortex back when you're not in survival physiology, and then you can start thinking. Then you can start using CBT and that kind of stuff. And then I think that's what's helpful. I just think when you're in an alarm state, like panic attack or anxiety attack, you need to combat the feeling first and deal with the feeling first. And then once you deal with that, get your body into a more calm, relaxed state. Then your mind comes back online, and then you can start using the cognitive therapies. So CBT is great. I don't think it's a first line treatment when you're actually having, a panic anxiety attack, or it's just not as effective as, going into your body first, regulating that, and then going into more cognitive aspects of this isn't real, I'm making this up, I do this all the time. It doesn't really help when your prefrontal cortex is offline, because you've lost the rational part of your brain when you go into alarm. So why are we trying to use the rational part of our brain, the cognitive part of our brain, to soothe a subcortical primitive problem like chronic anxiety? Just doesn't work for me. But it helps. It's one of those things that we need. I know I'm rattling on here. We need the body side and we need the mind side. We need both. What I find problematic with most therapies is they're very good at understanding the body side, giving you insights into why this is all happening, but they don't really address the somatic side at all. And if you don't do that, you're only going to get partial healing.
And I definitely want to dive into like the physical sensations that anxiety can cause and stress and how it all impacts the body. I want to stay on the mind piece because I think one of the things that I've struggled with and a lot of people struggle with is maybe it's just like, some initial ruminating thoughts like, oh my gosh, am I going to be home in time for dinner? Or is this girl going to say yes or no to me when I ask her out? Or is this person going to look at me the wrong way when I go into the gym? Like stuff like that. And it doesn't really get to the body yet because the level of anxiety is so low, right? So, do you think in those moments where you're not getting the physical sensations, you're not like feeling tightness in your chest, you're not feeling like a head rush or anything, like, do you think it's helpful to try to use some like, behavior or some, some thought tools in those moments so that you can kind of stop it in its track before it gets to the body? And if so, like, what are your thoughts on how to do that?
Well, the thing is, Doug, it's already in the body, right? I think the big fallacy is that we believe that the thoughts create the anxiety in the body when it's really the anxiety in the body, it's your physiology, which is usually coming from old wounding, old unresolved crap in your system. That imperceptibly is what's charging up the thoughts. You believe the thoughts are actually at the root cause of the thing because we're trained to think in language. So when we think, oh my God, I can't pay my rent, I'm really anxious, it makes me more anxious. What's more true is that your body was probably had some alarm in it already that you weren't aware of, that it's already kind of charging up your brain to think these thoughts. And then the brain thinks, I just thought these thoughts up out of the blue. And really, if you're going into the gym and you're worried, what are they going to say? Check your body, because I can guarantee you that's where it started. It doesn't come from your mind. And that's the big thing. I think that's why we haven't been able to heal anxiety or really help a lot of people with anxiety, because we're still treating it like a mind-based problem. When really, and the mind has a lot to do with it, absolutely. But the root cause, I believe that it's the old trauma stored in the body that creates the worried thoughts of the mind, than it is the worried thoughts of the mind creating this trauma in the body. So we're trying to fix the wrong thing, and I think that's the reason why psychiatrists, psychologists, all these therapists aren't really getting a lot of long-term success with anxiety. If you look at the stats, people do well for the first 3 to 6 months of therapy, 3 to 6 months of CBT, and then a year later, they're back pretty much at the same level of anxiety that they were.
And you mentioned that anxiety can be also described as being an alarm and it's like used for survival, right? How can somebody know? Like I know you've mentioned that at the root of anxiety most of the time it's, unresolved trauma. How can somebody know that it's that versus like a lifestyle thing where, maybe they're just not making enough money to pay the bills or they're having hard relationships with their family, like all these things that are causing like anxiety in the moment, and that digging back into their past, and looking at the relationship with their parents isn't necessarily going to help put more food on the table. So like how does somebody know the difference?
I think it's the degree of anxiety that you struggle with. We all have struggles with anxiety. My son's 19th birthday was yesterday, and he was supposed to be home at 5:30, and he didn't call us, text us, whatever. We thought his school ended at 2:30, so we're thinking, okay, well, 3 hours. Both his mother and I are kind of semi-panicking trying to reach him. Turns out his class didn't end until 5:30, right? So we had this whole thing built up in our minds of like how scary this was. And I think there is just general anxiety in the world. Also, though, we are in a society that has this low level of anxiety, alarm, angst in it already. So it's so much easier for the brain, because the brain's just a make sense, meaning making machine. So if you've got this low grade alarm that's sitting in your system, it doesn't have to be from childhood trauma, it can just be from just the society we live in. It's going to start creating these negative thought patterns. And because you made the thoughts up, you believe them. Like we believe that he was hit by a car or whatever. Like there's part of you that believes this stuff, right? Because it makes sense, and the brain loves making sense. So I think we really have to look at what's the true root cause of anxiety. Where are we going wrong with trying to fix it? So there's day-to-day anxiety that we all get. But if I look back with people, like people will say, well, I have low blood sugar and that's why I have anxiety. It's like, yeah, that'll rev up your system a little bit, for sure. Thyroid problems will rev up your system a little bit too. But most commonly, people will have trauma from their youth, and it may not be abuse, it may not be neglect, it may not be whatever, but it's trauma just from the world that we live in today. And that trauma gets put into our bodies, and then we use that trauma to make up all these stories that create these negative scenarios in our mind, which only just create more trauma. So it's not that I believe that everything is childhood trauma, but I think that we do have this sense of trauma in our system, and I just don't think that we pay much attention to the body. We try and fix it with the thoughts because we worship thoughts in North America. We worship the mind, and we believe the mind can heal the mind. And Andrew Huberman says it's not true, and I believe him. It's not true. We need the body to help heal the mind too. So I think it's trying to get out of this mindset that everything can be fixed with changing your thought patterns, because it can't. And there are some people that have had severe trauma that have severe anxiety. There's other people that have had relatively little trauma but still suffer from relatively little anxiety, but it's still uncomfortable. And everybody to some extent is feeling some anxiety in the world today. Like Krishnamurti said, that it's no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And Gabor Mate's latest book, The Myth of Normal, talks about this at length. So it's like we are alarmed creatures. It's just so normal for us to be in this high-paced, Instagram, zombie scrolling, fast, like this world that our brains can't take it. We've got Stone Age brains in a digital world, and it's starting to show. The cracks are starting to show.
And so with all that said, you mentioned that there's this like low level of anxiety that exists in the world today, and I'm all about like providing people some tools that they can use to control the controllables. What are a few things that maybe you do for yourself? What are a few things that you encourage your kids to do, your patients on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to help them create like a buffer between them and the anxiety so that they don't end up in full panic every day?
Well, anxiety at its core is really a mind-body disconnect. It's a bunch of things, but it's a mind-body disconnect. So what happens is sometimes we have trauma in our body that's stored in our body from old things, and we want to get away from that trauma, so we zip up into our mind. We overthink, we ruminate, we do all this sort of stuff. And when we go into our heads and expect our heads to be able to solve all the problems, we separate from our body. So anything that joins your mind and your body back together, breath will do this, yoga will do this, Tai Chi will do this, breath work, like actual, doing this sort of hyperventilation procedure, self-touch does this, essential oils sometimes will bring you, if you look at a boxer, like what they do is they put this smelling salt in them and bang, they're back into their body, because they're almost been knocked out. So it's really anything that joins your mind and your body back together. And neuroscience backs this up. I mean, there's a place in our brain called the premotor area, like just behind our prefrontal cortex, but before the motor and sensory strip in the brain. And there's a lot of our intention gets made there in that premotor area. So if we can work on connecting the mind and the body together through, and it doesn't necessarily have to be exercise, but the best way of doing that I have found and my patients have found is starting to match your body with your breath. And this is what yoga is great at. Like it's just like breathe in, breathe out. Matching your body and your breath is one of the best ways of alleviating anxiety in the acute setting. Now, you don't want to be doing this kind of thing in the grocery store, that kind of thing. You're going to look a little bit weird. But just putting your hand on your chest, just really connecting with yourself, feeling your breath move in through your nostrils, feeling it bring in your air. Huberman also talks about the physiological sigh, 2 quick sniffs in through your mouth, 3, that was 3, and then a long, slow exhale. Do 5 rounds of that. I guarantee it'll slow you down, that kind of thing. So all these things, but the underlying thing is matching your mind with your body. Don't just sit in your brain going, this isn't real, this is not going to happen, I'm not going to lose my job. That's basically just putting you on a hamster wheel that you're never going to get off of.
Have you found, though, some like common themes of people that you've seen where they're able to have a healthy relationship with anxiety on a day-to-day basis of things that they do? Like maybe it's, 8 hours of sleep, exercise an hour a day, they drink X amount of water, X amount of time on the screens. Like, have you seen any common themes amongst the people you work with?
All those things you just mentioned. Yeah. If you look at all those things you just mentioned, they're all addictive. Screens are addictive. Sleep can be addictive. There's a lot of things that can be addictive. And it's basically, can you get some balance in those areas? And that's really what it kind of comes down to, because when your mind and body are out of connection, you will create some alarm in your system. And that alarm will get read by your brain in this process called interoception, where your brain is always reading your body. And if there's alarm in your body, your brain has to do something with that, especially the left hemisphere, especially the left hemisphere that's analytical, linear, logical. It feels that negativity and it goes, okay, how can I make sense of this? Okay, well, I'm worried that my son isn't home yet. I'm worried that my tax bill is going to be huge. I'm worried that, my relationship isn't going as well as I want. So your brain will, after the fact, make sense. I call your brain an accessory after the fact, because if you're feeling alarm in your body, your brain will make up a reason for it. And then you'll blame it on your brain when really the ultimate cause is this old alarm energy that's stored in your body and that you don't even see.
And so, taking this now down a slightly different path, but along the same theme, we've talked about like what somebody can do to make sure that they're managing anxiety in a healthy way, like in the near term, even in the long term, making sure you have that mind body connection. I think a lot of people, Russ, are unaware that they're even feeling anxious or they have this chronic low level anxiety because of the world we live in. And then of these people, a lot of people have a hard time developing some self-awareness around this, right? They're not engaged in personal development, or maybe they're just so busy they don't have time to pay as much attention. How does somebody know that they're struggling with this stuff? How does somebody know that they're actually experiencing anxiety and it's not just like regular stress?
I mean, the biggest sort of hidden feature is, how are your relationships? Like, do you feel I remember doing this joke once on stage years ago. It's like, okay, people ask me all the time, like, should I stay with my current partner or should I go? And the joke that I used to tell was something like this, was basically, okay, when you come around the corner and you see their car is in the driveway and they're home, how do you feel? Right? Are you like, oh man, I'm really glad they're home. I'm looking forward to them. Or do you think I should just drive? I should just keep going. So look at your relationships. Look at your relationships. If your relationships are struggling, if you're often dissociated, if you're often anxiety, when you're in anxiety, you can't connect. Like, if we actually look at the neurophysiology of this social engagement system that all human beings have, eye contact, tone of voice, prosody of voice, body language, all this kind of stuff, like you and I right now, if you're connected, I look you in the eyes, I look at your body language, I feel comfortable with you, that kind of thing. So we're not exercising our social engagement system because we're alarmed. Like, when you're in survival physiology, this part of our neurology gets shut off because back, 70,000 years ago, if you and I were in a tribe and we were being chased by a warring tribe, I'm not going to go, hey, Doug, how's it going with the wife when we're running away? Like, are you feeling happy and fulfilled in your relationships? No. So what happens is that social engagement system gets shut off when we're alarmed. And when that social engagement system gets shut off, we can't connect to other people. And what heals us, what truly helps us heal from anxiety, is feeling connected to ourselves, especially our younger self that we kind of judge, abandon, blame, and shame if we had trauma, and other people. So if we can't connect, if we feel distant, if we've got to go to the pub every night, if we feel distant from our partner, chances are anxiety is at the helm. Now, you can have depression, you can have OCD, you can have a bunch of other stuff, but chances are addiction and anxiety, like we were saying, are kissing cousins. The reason why we're addicted is because we're anxious. The anxiety has shut off our ability to connect with each other. It's a fundamental human need to be able to be connected. So what do? Have a few drinks. Hey, you're my best friend. I love you, man. Like, we're connected then. People take opiates. Opiates charge up, morphine charges up this part of our brain that makes us feel relaxed and want to connect with other people. Now, if you've had trauma in your background, those circuits are shut down. So you can't connect with someone. And when you can't connect with someone, you feel anxious. So then you take this drug, then you feel good. Now you can get connected again. But it's only short term because it's the drug is doing it rather than you. So what I tell people to do to heal is that try and improve your relationships. Try and stay more conscious, because I get people to look at, it's like, I don't know if I have anxiety. And I've had people write me on my Instagram page and say, I didn't know I had anxiety until I read your book. I get that all the time because people just have this low level of angst because I do believe the world is more stressful. And just to throw in a quick other point, and I think that's why our children are so stressed as well. It's not that we're bad parents. It's just that the level of stress in our environment is so high. Parents aren't home anymore. They're out working. The kids need that support from the parents in order not to be stressed. But the parents are out working, so the kids have to connect with each other, and that's not a lot of stability either. So that, and then what they do is they go on their screens, which also, bringing this full circle, the screens don't engage our social engagement system either. Like, we need this face-to-face play when we're young. We need loving, caring interactions with the people that love us to make this social engagement system rev up and mature and work. So that's why we have this epidemic of social anxiety, is because these kids typically were stuck on screens. Their parents were working. They didn't have a chance to mature their social engagement system. So who wants to go to a party when the software in your brain for connection doesn't work? It's like if you invited me to go curling because your curling team needs an extra player, I'm not going to be too crazy about that because I'm not a curler. But if you say, hey, I'm short one guy for a softball game, I love softball and I'm good at softball, so I'm going to play that. So we're really not allowing our social engagement system, especially in our children, but it's true for adults too, to develop. And that's why when you say, how do you know if you have anxiety? Look at your relationships.
Yeah. That's definitely a good marker, right, of whether or not you're struggling with anxiety, because typically when you're struggling with anxiety, you'll take out things on other people and your relationships will be,
Irritability, yeah.
yeah, negatively impacted. And I also do want to clarify, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that I think like some anxiety and stress is good for you, right? Like this is like your fight or flight system to like alert you when like something's off or you need to do something, like it gets you to go to a certain place. But in your understanding, like what's the difference between like stress and anxiety? Because I think often, people kind of interchange them.
Well, stress is, if you have a healthy reaction to stress, you will be motivated to do something about that stress. If you're anxious, you tend not to be motivated to and withdraw. And when you withdraw, like if you stop paying your taxes, that shit gets worse, right? Like, so it's a case of, mobilization. If you're stressed and you can mobilize yourself, good. But if you are anxious or depressed and you get stressed, it's very difficult to mobilize yourself. And that creates this vicious cycle that you just keep, burying yourself deeper and deeper and deeper into a hole. So it's really, when I get stressed, can you do something about it? There are people in jobs where it doesn't matter how hard they try or whatever, they still don't get that passing grade, which is incredibly stressful for people. So when we lose control, and I think that we've lost a lot of control in our society in general, that creates a lot more alarm in our system, which of course creates more anxiety, and the whole thing just loops around. So really, it's a motivational state. Eustress, it's been termed eustress, UE stress, has been termed like, yeah, we need that. We need that to boost up our cortisol, our norepinephrine in our brain, just to get us going, right? But stress, and they showed this with studies with monkeys, if you don't give an outlet, like a practical outlet, like if you stress an animal and you don't give them a way to escape, they get learned helplessness and they turn into victims. They will just literally stop moving. And I think that's what happens in depression and to some extent with anxiety as well. I think people after a while just give up and they don't leave their house. They have a panic attack in a grocery store, so now they can't go into grocery stores. Like, I just see people lives just narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow because they can't do all these things because they had some sort of panic attack or anxiety attack while they were doing it.
And then it becomes like a hard challenge, right? Because then like their life gets significantly harder, and it's unfortunate that's all happened. And then on the other side of that, they continue to will blame, other things in their life for them not being happy. And in the reality,
Which makes sense. I mean, they can make it make sense. I'm upset because, my wife and I aren't getting along. Well, it's more like your wife and aren't getting along, so that's why you're upset. And then you're blaming it on something else. Like, we're so good, human beings, at just blaming that isn't the problem, that isn't the real problem, and then we get stuck in that. We assume, okay, it's our relationship, okay, it's our kids, that's not the issue. No, it's actually, if we're really not going to go too philosophical, it's your relationship to yourself. That's what it comes down to. Anxiety is always a separation from self, always, always, always.
And so, like, as we now let's start to like peel it back a little bit, because we've identified like how to manage low level anxiety, how to manage some tools that you can utilize when you're feeling a bit emotionally charged. We talked about how to know if you have anxiety, the difference between anxiety and stress. And you've touched on like the root cause of it. Why do
Yeah.
you think people are feeling so lost?
I think that we're in this dopamine driven immediate gratification society. And I think we're kind of losing that sort of serotonin based, hey, let's just sit here and watch the sunset for half an hour, right? We're not able to do that anymore. So I think our own idea of what our life should be, the expectations are so high. And there is something in dopamine called reward prediction error, which is if think that you're going to get, a B on an exam and you go up to the board and you see that you get an A, you get this massive spike in dopamine, right? But if you go up to the board and you see that you got a C, you get this huge drop of dopamine that drops below baseline. And then we get more and more addicted to the dopamine hit and the more and more this immediate gratification society. So I think we start wanting more, and then we see social media, all these people like, I'm in Hawaii, I'm in Bali, we see all these people living their best life. And one of the sayings that I love for years is, don't compare your inside life to their outside life. So I think a lot of it is that, we are getting more separate in general. I think COVID did that to us, and all anxiety is separation anxiety. So the sense of separation from each other as human beings, I think is increasing, which makes us more dysphoric. It makes us more unhappy. And then we start looking towards our addictions, like that dopamine based immediate gratification, to sort of make our lives make sense. And it's an addiction that isn't going to help us in the long run.
So what's the path out of that?
Presence, awareness, presence, but we're talking about 10% of the population, because most people just sort of go through their lives the way that they see it. They don't really see that there's another option. They don't see the awareness. They don't see the ability to kind of take a helicopter view of what's going on in their situation. They don't see that their feelings and their thoughts are not who they are. So, in that population, it's really difficult to kind of create social change if there's not enough awareness that change needs to happen. People know that they don't feel good, but they don't know what to do about it.
People who listen to my show, they're looking to make a change. They're looking to level up their life. They're looking to better themselves. If somebody's listening to this and they're feeling a little lost, they're feeling just disconnected from themselves, disconnected from the world a little bit, disconnected from their goals, what's a good first step for them to take to be able to come back to themselves and be able to feel like they're on this continuum moving forward, so that they can not feel so left behind?
Yeah, as woo as it sounds, I just think self-touch, just putting your hand over your chest, just sort of getting into that sensation of touch, which I don't think we get enough of when we're young. I don't think we get enough touch when we're adults. And touch is one of those things that we are hardwired to connect with. And if you don't get enough touch, and this can be in a way mental touch as well, like personal connection, conversations with friends, like deep conversations, connection, that kind of stuff. But I would start with kind of just, breath and touch, as woo as that sounds. And I know people from a neuroscientist and a doctor, they want something that's a little more, maybe sexy in a way. But I think it's just really getting into sensation, because a lot of stress is basically a separation of your mind and your body. We go up into our heads and we start getting this dopamine addiction, and we lose that sense of our body. And then time goes by. It feels like, man, it's like 2 months have gone by. I haven't really noticed. It's just not being in your body. It's not being in that sense of sensation and making the intention to stay with sensation, even, and especially if that sensation is uncomfortable. If you feel sad or whatever, it's okay to feel sad. You don't have to run and go to your phone all the time. It's just being able to metabolize that feeling and being able to stay in it. And it's hard, when you get into depression and anxiety, that's a pathological perseverance in it. But in general, it just kind of doesn't allow us to stay, we don't allow ourselves to stay present in any emotion, good, bad, or indifferent, because we're so used to what's next, what's next, what's next. So the bottom line is that we're in this dopamine driven situation and we're not actually staying in sensation. We're always looking for something new, something better, which is, part of our human wiring. But unfortunately, it makes us very unhappy in the long term.
And so you mentioned the importance of touch and putting our hand over our heart, and as woo woo and as maybe odd as it may sound to somebody. A lot of times people will take quiet time, like first thing in the morning, and connect to their breath, connect to themselves. Is this what you would recommend, like doing this like first thing in the morning?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people do meditation and that kind of thing, but I think we totally miss this aspect of self-touch. One of the things that I work on with the people that, I'm an anxiety specialist that struggle with anxiety. It's like, where is this alarm? I call anxiety alarm because that's what I believe it is. Where is this alarm in your body? And some people say, well, it's up in my throat or in my chest or in my belly or whatever. It's like, okay, what does it feel like? Well, it's kind of hot. It's kind of sharp. It feels like a pressure. Feels like a pain. It's like, okay, can you put your hand over that area? Can you connect with it? Because to go another step into woo is, I believe a lot of people that have chronic anxiety have a younger version of themselves that manifest in their body. So for me, it's in my solar plexus, and there's a lot of neuroscience behind this. Like the insular cortex in the brain sort of mediates this sort of top down, bottom up kind of part. It's kind of like the way station where we feel and think at the same place. And I think that we create these body memories, these implicit memories, unconscious memories that are mediated by this part of the brain and the amygdala. But the insula is one of those things that it's kind of like, where do you feel something in your body? Your insula is kind of what metabolizes that. It's like, oh, I feel when you get broken up with or something, you're going through a breakup, the insula creates that feeling of heartache in your chest. So one of my work is to try and can we access that insular cortex when you are feeling anxious? Can we change the sensation? Can we accept the sensation? Can we put our hand over it? Can we connect with it? Because I think that is the younger version of us. And I realize this does sound woo, and as a medical doctor and neuroscientist, I want to have a seizure sometimes when I talk about this stuff. But it's really important to connect with ourselves through self-touch that we don't do. It's not like meditation's pretty common, yoga's pretty common, but it's really getting that sensation and connecting with that sensation, because the alarm sensation in your body could well be that younger version of you trying to get your attention.
Is there any kind of like protocol you would recommend to somebody who's feeling like anxious in the moment? They're feeling a bit trapped. Is it just putting their hand over their heart and breathing? Is there like I know we talked about like the nostril breathing and the exhale. I think the last time
nostril and stuff.
you came on. Like how do we blend those things together?
Well, it's getting out of your head, really, because I think what happens with stress is we try and think our way out of a feeling problem. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But it doesn't stop us from trying to do that. I mean, I think as children, the only place we had to go if our parents weren't, there for us in a way, was our heads, because staying in your body was just too painful. Like that's where all the pain is stored. So you go up into your head, you start overthinking, you start becoming hypervigilant, that kind of thing. And it's a habit that we take into adulthood that we don't even realize that we've been caught in our head for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years sometimes. So it's like, can you make the conscious intention to move out of your head, because your worries aren't going to solve anything. In fact, they're just going to make you more uncomfortable. Can you take the opposite choice and go into your body rather than trying to stay in your head? Now, your body's probably going to be uncomfortable because this is where you store all the old alarm. So initially, it may feel more uncomfortable to go into your body, but I think there is this kind of overwhelming sense that when you put your hand over the area where you feel your stress in your body, there is this sense of connection that's there, and it immediately helps people. And it's like, okay, I'm on the right track here. I'm on the right track with this sensation and tracking this in my body and slowing it down too. Like our minds go so quickly. Our mind goes so fast that it just outruns our body most of the time. And it's like, can you slow your mind down enough so that it can actually join up with your body. Because one of the things I say about anxiety, chronic anxiety, is that it's a separation of your adult self and your child self, because the adult in you doesn't want to go back to the child because that's where all our pain is stored. And it's a separation from our mind, from our body. So when we connect our mind and our body back together again, we actually create this fertile ground to actually metabolize the trauma, metabolize the sadness, metabolize the pain, rather than just going into our head, which basically just suspends it. The pain is in suspended animation as soon as you go into your head. You never actually make a dent in that pain because you're too busy up in your head. If the issue is, stuck in your body and you're worrying around hypervigilant in your mind all the time, that part of your body never gets dealt with, and that pain never gets any sort of airtime, never gets any connection. So of course it's not going to heal, and it's probably just going to get worse.
What would you say the biggest mistakes people make that might not be so obvious, maybe these are subtle, that, throughout the week actually increase their anxiety?
Well, just thinking more, just believing unconsciously that you're going to solve this problem. If you're worried about your son or your daughter or your mom or your dad or whatever, worrying about it isn't going to do anything. In fact, it's just going to drag your physiology into the gutter. But if you can learn how to sort of go into your body and allow that sensation to be there, that discomfort about, like, did a podcast about my oldest dog, Buddha. He's kind of failing, so he may not last another 6 months or so. So it's one of those things where, can I go into that sensation in my body of what it's going to be like to lose him? And can I stay with it? Can I actually metabolize it rather than just overthink and go, well, he's still doing okay. He's still doing well. He'll probably be okay. That kind of stuff. Like, we know that we're just worrying, and we know that the worry doesn't actually solve anything. It just suspends things in suspended animation, and the pain is still there. So go at the pain directly, allow the pain to be there, metabolize the pain. And a lot of people who have, like, a partner, relative, parent, whatever, with a cancer diagnosis, they do a lot of the grieving before the person actually passes. And this is what I'm talking about. It's just basically metabolizing the angst that you're feeling rather than going up into your head and trying to explain why you should feel better.
Right. Other than overthinking things or thinking that you can think your way out of a problem or think your way into a solution, is there anything that people should be doing that they're not doing? Maybe like daily exercise, movement, certain ways.
Movement, for sure. Like, I think even, like, I have this little practice that I do sometimes, and I just basically move my hand and my breath. It looks a bit Tai Chi-ish and that kind of stuff, but it's basically, I just make it up. And anytime that you match your breath and your movement together, you start joining your mind and your body together. So it starts alleviating your stress right away. And when you move into your body and out of your head, you're starting to get to the root cause of the problem, instead of just, unfortunately, we're wired to believe that unconsciously believe that worry is helpful. And it basically just traps us in more worry. So the more you can go into the sensation specifically of your body, even if it hurts, the more you can start actually processing and metabolizing the underlying cause of this problem in the first place, as opposed to just trying to numb it by, overthinking.
On the other side of this is people can become, I think, passive, because we're talking about how to, like, not suppress, but mitigate stress, mitigate anxiety. And on the other side of all this, there's people that are feeling, unmotivated, unable to focus, lazy, if you will. And so how can people do the opposite if they're, like, trying to upregulate their nervous system a bit to be able to prime themselves to take action?
Well, this is hard, but get off social media, for one. It's just you're burned out your dopamine system. We have this place in our brain called the ventral tegmental area that makes dopamine, one of them. And it squirts dopamine onto the nucleus accumbens, which is basically our motivation center. And if you create way too much dopamine all the time, you drop the bar, or actually you raise the bar into what's going to excite you. So if you're always excited all the time, when you drop into a normal baseline state, it's going to feel pretty pretty lonely and bereft in there. So a lot of what happens, I think, is that we get so wrapped up in this dopamine driven society that we forget about the sort of the more serotonin, the more here and now, kind of like the more awareness, the more presence. And if you don't spend a lot of time in presence, you're probably not going to want to spend a lot more time in presence, and you just keep going at this dopamine cycle. And you can only go at it for so long until it just starts to burn you out and you just feel, and this is what I'm seeing a lot in people, this thing called anhedonia, which is this, I don't feel pleasure in anything. Because they burned out their dopamine system, right? So you can start building it back up again by doing things like, cold plunges, putting your body in this sort of stressful thing where, you can kind of recirculate some of the isness of life, like the feeling in life, even if it's uncomfortable. So I think we spend so much time avoiding discomfort, and through distraction, specifically with social media, is that we never really get a chance to feel anything anymore because we're always looking for the next hit. And after a while, you burn out that dopamine system, and then you won't feel motivation for anything. And then that's a dangerous place to be in, because there's not a whole lot of ways out of that other than doing the exact opposite, which is maybe getting into some meditation, going for walks, staying away from kind of like that immediate gratification all the time, and just retraining that system to build up, the sense of life again. Because that's what I'm seeing with so many people, is that they don't really have this joy in life. I don't see too many people that feel joy in life anymore.
So do you think that the only solution to this is similar to an elimination diet, where you completely detox yourself from dopamine for a period of time and then start to reintroduce it into your life in a way that's healthy?
Yeah, or just what do you like? What did you like when you were a kid? Like, did you like playing road hockey? Did you like riding your bike? Like, what is it that you liked to do when you were younger? And you're probably still like to do those things now. So start with the things that you know that you liked in the past, and start reintroducing them. Start going on a bike ride, every couple of days or whatever. Getting out of that mold of being in the house, being separate from other people, connecting with other people. I mean, we used to have, in the 70s and 80s, we used to have clubs, car clubs and clubs, and people would join and meet together. And now, because we have everything we kind of desire in a way in on a computer screen, why would we go to the house? Movie theaters aren't doing well anymore. Like, all these things that used to get people out and get them feeling together and feeling connected. I always get reminded of those starlings, when you see those thousands of starlings and they're all moving in one direction. It looks like a big cloud. There is this neural net that we believe forms from bird to bird, and they all move in the same thing. They're all almost sharing one nervous system. And I think on some level too, this is what happens with like soccer hooliganism and, and football games and basketball games, when crowds just go nuts, is that there's this wiring that occurs between human beings that we can't explain, but it's very powerful. And if we lose that connection with other people, we become depressed. And what you and I have talked about before is we develop this us and them mentality, where we only feel good when we're making them feel bad, when we're insulting them. And this is what social media is doing. This is why people will go on and just insult someone who says, like, here's my flower arrangement that I did today. And it's like, why do you use roses? Like, you're an idiot to use like, where is this coming from? And it's coming from the fact that people feel separate from other people. And it becomes ultimately because you feel separate from yourself. And when you're split from yourself, you're always looking for something to make yourself feel better. And usually the first thing you look for is like dopamine driven. It's not, you don't sort of look like, oh, okay, I'll just go down and watch the sunset and make myself feel better that way. It's like, I'll go on social media, or I'll go do something that kind of, involves a screen or involves a phone. And eventually that kind of creates this internal separateness within us that just makes us really unhappy.
you're talking about the importance of reconnection and like getting back to your younger self and your true self and doing things that you used to like doing as a kid. If somebody's listening to this or they're watching this and maybe they need to make more money in their life, maybe they need to work on their relationship with their partner, maybe they need to work on their health, while going and playing road hockey. I mean, if they like playing road hockey as a kid, they're doing that now, that's great, but that's not going to necessarily help them make more money or help them feel more motivated to reconnect with their spouse. Like outside of like getting grounded, kind of staying off of social media a bit, what are some other things somebody can do if they're feeling unmotivated to change something?
Yeah, I mean it's a catch-22 because when you feel unmotivated, you don't really want to do anything. So that's the problem. And I think when you were saying like when you're playing road hockey, it's not going to make you connected. I think it does. I think when you're more connected to yourself, you're more open to your spouse, you're more open to sharing. And when we're not connected to ourselves, we become more closed. And the more closed we are, the more we kind of have that air of being closed. And people don't want to come and connect with us because we don't have that sense. And I think on a global stage, this is what's happening. Everyone's kind of withdrawn into themselves a little bit. And nobody's out there sort of making that first move to make the connection anymore because we're not happy. I know when I'm on vacation, like Cynthia and I just came back from Hawaii, and she said, look, you're so much happier. Not that I'm unhappy in general, which is not the case, but when we were on vacation, like we were connecting, we did all this sort of stuff. And then when you're here, you're writing, you're, doing podcasts and all that kind of stuff. And she says, I feel a little more separate from you. So I think when you're happier in general, I think you're just more connected. And the reverse is also true. When you're more sad or more upset in general, the more disconnected you are and the less likely you're going to be connected. So one of the ways of doing that is like, what do I want? Like, what makes me happy? And a lot of people have a hard time with that question because they haven't addressed it for so long. Like, what makes you happy? And finding like what used to make you happy and kind of slowly dipping your toe back into that again. Because I think when we're happier, we're more connected. When we're more sad, we're less connected, and both tend to exacerbate the same. So if you're happy, you're more likely to continue on being happy. If you're sad or anxious, you're more likely to continue on being sad and anxious. So it does take an intention to change. It's not going to change on its own.
So would you say that the number one habit or skill somebody must develop in order to stay motivated, to be productive, to stay focused is that paying attention to the connection to self and working on that?
Yeah. There's a saying that says your connection with other people can be no greater than your connection with yourself. And I believe that's true. I think that there's, narcissistic people and that kind of thing that are very good at giving people what they perceive the other person needs. And it's sort of a manipulative sense. But yeah, I mean, that sense of being connected with yourself, everything comes from that. And I can tell you that from my own personal experience as well. That's how I got to the place where I wrote the book and that kind of thing. It was like, oh, I have this self connection. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's a happy connection. Like you can be connected to the sad parts of yourself. Like internal family systems work is a lot about this. Is like, can you find the part of you that was like bullied or abused or neglected or abandoned when you were a child? Can you find that part? And that's not going to be fun. But if we have this separation from ourselves, whereas our adult self learns how to be, adapting to the situation, but really neglects the child in us that's still asking to be seen, heard, loved, and protected, eventually you're going to be unhappy. Eventually you're going to be separate. And I think this is why people commit suicide. I think this is why people get divorced is that they lose the meaning in life, and they lose the meaning in life because they've lost the connection within themselves.
Morning routines have become super popular over the last decade.
Yeah.
I think one of the main reasons is because it helps somebody allocate times for themselves. It helps people allocate time for themselves before the day gets started, before they got to take the kids to school, before they got to go to work, before they got to do X, Y, and Z. We talked about the importance of connecting to yourself through touch, breath, first thing in the morning when you wake up. we're talking now about some introspective stuff, and journaling can become very powerful when doing so. So as far as the morning routine goes, anything you would recommend somebody doing like every single morning to be able to stay connected to themselves so that they can be more motivated, focused, happier, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, a simple one is this is a meditation that I kind of use when I've fallen out of meditation, because it's fairly easy to do. It's just sit yourself in a comfortable position, be in a quiet room or whatever, and then just count your breaths in and out. So I count to 50. So it's inhale 1, exhale 2, inhale 3, exhale 4. I don't say inhale, exhale, but I just say the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that I do in that particular sort of meditation is that I elongate the space between the inhalation and the exhalation. So there is that break as you breathe out. There's a tiny little gap between when you start breathing in again and when you breathe in. There's a tiny little gap between, and I just expand that gap just like an extra half of a second. And just that focus, it's an easy meditation to do. And you can start by doing 20, or 10. It's just a matter of just starting. James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about that. Like, don't say I'm going to meditate and go, try and sit down for 20 minutes because you're going to blow your brains out. Like, it's too much. And then you're going to develop an aversion to it and you're never going to want to do it again. So often I'll tell people, just do 10, inhale 1, 2, and do that. Start with that. Get some success with that, and then start, because it's just slowing yourself down. Like, we go so quickly that I think this is one of the reasons why I think people say, my life is just flying by, because I think we live in our heads, and we live so quickly in our heads that we don't feel in our bodies. We don't feel the day. We don't feel anything because we're too busy trying to get to that next place where, we might be able to have a drink or we can eat, like lunch is coming. Oh, lunch is 2 hours away. What am I going to do? So it is that building up that resilience to be okay with not having anything specific to soothe yourself. Can you just stay in that moment? Can you just stay in? And easier said than done. And I realize that it's not easy, especially if you're going through anxiety, depression, OCD, all that stuff. But it's just, you got to start somewhere.